Adapted by Ron Nyswaner, Philadelphia, Freeheld, from the Bethan Roberts novel and directed by Michael Granage, with restraint and understated elegance. My Policeman builds as it lets its characters accept the truth about one another. And in its final moments, we are allowed to witness the quiet power of a love that can be finally embraced. Please join me in welcoming Linus Roach, Rupert Everett, Gina McKee, David Dawson, Harry Stiles, Emma Corrin, and director Michael Granage. When I first saw the film with the team here at TIFF, there was literally a moment of silence after the film ended. We were so profoundly moved and immediately agreed that what it really inspired was such a strong sense of love and courage. I'd like to ask my first question to Michael. What drew you to this story? Tell me about how this story resonates with you personally.
That's me down here, Anita. Hello. Hello.
Yes.
That was for me, was it?
It is for you.
Hello, everyone. What first drew me to the story was, I guess, a personal connection of some kind, because I was born into the England that is represented at the start of this film. And as a gay man, that meant a great deal, obviously, because in the last 60 years, we've made an incredible change to what it was like then. The law was changed in 1967. There was then at least a generation of continued prejudice. But slowly, things started to change. Things started to move forward, and the world we find ourselves in now is very different to the one that's represented in the film in 1957. Although for the first time in my life, I think that is a little fragile at the moment, and that is part of what drew me to this film, because I felt the film is many things, but it is great when a film can be part of a debate. And I think, certainly, I hope My Policeman can be part of a debate that's going on right now. But that's just one thing that attracted me to the film, personal.
Yes, and on that, as you saw, the story moves between the 1950s, when homosexuality was illegal in the UK, to the 1990s, when it became much more accepted in general society. On that note, I'd like to ask a question to Rupert, Gina, and Linus. Why is it important for stories like this not to be lost with time? And maybe we can begin with Rupert.
Would you repeat the question? I was so worried about who was going to answer first.
Yes. Why is it important for stories like this not to be lost with time?
Oh, well, I think it's very simple. It's a great story. There's a lot of human suffering, and like Michael said, it's a fascinating journey to go on from modern homosexuality to 1950s homosexuality, and how far we've come, and that's very exciting in a story to see. Even though our side of the story is quite a depressed side of the story in a way. Don't you think?
I find that there is some optimism in there, but it's not at the forefront, perhaps. I think ultimately that there is... I'm trying to be, without... Obviously, I know you've seen it, but I know that people are recording this, so I'm trying not to give away too much. But I think that the end does show a certain amount of optimism, in that there's an attempt to address the past.
And for you, Linus?
I think I'd just echo that, really, that, culture evolves. Thank God. We've still got a long way to go, but that, over this huge amount of time, there's a little bit of redemption at the end. There's a bit of healing. There's a future, and I feel that's the power of the story. And also just to remember that however much we grumble about the times we're in, we're actually extremely lucky. So it's important to remember that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like younger audiences seeing this film will really appreciate the history and the journey that many went through to arrive here today. And I feel like that will really be a strong takeaway. Yes. The next question is, what initially drew you to this script? And we would like to have as many of the panelists answer that. So perhaps we can start with Harry.
Me? Yeah, I think what initially drew me to the script is, I think it's quite a, it's obviously like the themes in the film. I think, you know, it's based in two different kind of time settings, but I think the general themes are incredibly timeless. I think that's why the film works so well. I think, you know, the themes of love and freedom and the kind of search for that is incredibly relevant, kind of whatever time you were to set it in. And then I think, for me, a big draw to it was I think people are able to see a part of themselves in each of the characters. I think that's what is kind of the most beautiful thing about all of the characters have some really nice qualities, and they also have some flaws that, you know, we might hope not to have, but as humans we all have them. And I think at different points in the story you're able to see bits of yourself, and sometimes maybe not your favorite parts of yourself in different characters. And I think that's why it kind of resonated with me so much. Was just, you know, whether it's Marion's kind of you know, kind of like acceptance of, or kind of like going along with things kind of reluctantly, or, you know, all the different kind of like, kind of more deceitful parts of the characters, and all of that. I think there's just a very human aspect to all of them. I think that's probably what did it for me.
Emma, did you want to answer that question as well?
You put that really well.
Thank you.
I think similarly for me, very relatable in many ways. Everyone's flaws and like the nuance and complexity of these young people working, like living in a very strange time and trying to figure out who they are. Yeah, and I think I really like the joy that they find amongst themselves as a trio, and the joy in that friendship. I know that that's something we spoke about a lot in rehearsal. And then also that juxtaposed with like the tragedy in the end, and like, yeah, everything that they go through. I liked that there were those two sides of that. Yeah.
And David?
I think initially I wanted to do it because Michael was doing it. I've worked with Michael many times over the years, and it's always an absolute joy. And this was equally as special. But I think I was fascinated in playing Patrick to ask the question, how does somebody not only survive but thrive in this time? And exploring how Patrick can have two different personas, like the public persona in which he can achieve his ambitions and be respectable within that society, and then exploring the private man, the vulnerability, and someone who, like everybody, just wants to, you know, find love and beauty in the world. So that excited me.
Yes, fantastic. And just moving forward from that same question, and this is a question again for Harry, Emma, and David. Can you talk about playing such complex characters and the circumstances around the decisions they made and the challenges they faced at that time for your characters?
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, I think it's something that really drew me to Marion, was that complexity, because, yeah, especially in like what she ends up doing. I don't know if I'm allowed to spoil stuff. Or, we're all here. Yeah, the decisions that she makes, and that really intrigued me because I feel like I had to really think about like how to justify that with myself for her. Obviously, the time she was living in, I think she was such a product of her time and the society that she was functioning in, but also what really fascinated me was like her youth and I really had this sense of her as like that first time you fall in love and the intensity of feeling that you experience, and then the fallout from that can leave you feeling so hurt and so fearful, and the fact that she was acting from that place and that driving her to do some of the things that she did. Yeah, so much complexity to work with. But then the great joy of this like friendship and the love that they all have for each other. And I think it's also rare to explore a love triangle where all those dots are joined up so equally. And I think that within the trio, they all have their own dynamic. And I thought that was really rare. And yeah, it gave us a lot to work with, which was cool.
Yeah, it certainly makes, I thought I was excited, hopefully for how an audience will respond to the journey they go on throughout their lives, you know, and scripts are very exciting when you know that an audience might, it's what Harry said before really, are conflicted perhaps in how they feel towards these individuals, but hopefully you understand it's because of the world in which they live that they made those decisions.
Yes, Harry.
Yeah, I think it kind of, you know, speaking on the position of Tom, I think he's a product of his time. I think that the nicest thing about kind of our three characters is kind of echoing what Emma said, but I think despite all the complexity and you know, the kind of deceiving nature of like a lot of aspects of the kind of triangle between them, there's also just a lot of like very real friendship, I think, as well. I think, you know, Tom's love for Marion is very real, and Tom's love for Patrick is very real, and I think that part of why it's so painful in the story is because I think Marion and Patrick are actually very good friends, and there's like a very real love there as well. So I think just having that kind of duality of, you know, everything not being so kind of black and white in terms of, well, you've wronged me and that means I don't like you anymore, and all that kind of thing. It's not really how the world works and how human beings work. So I think there's so much nuance to them and so much complexity that comes for people in real life around, you know, sexuality and finding themselves and all of that kind of stuff. And I think, you know, around sex in particular and sexual relationships being, you know, shrouded in kind of fear for a man in that time, for Tom, for example, and fear and shame and all these things that you don't necessarily know that much about if you don't encounter other, you know, homosexual men at that time. It's for someone like Tom, it's all of his feelings towards men I would imagine feel just so foreign. So, yeah, I think just kind of anytime it's that complex and you're getting to play with like actual nuanced kind of human emotion is really nice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I was really struck by the empathy and the tenderness I felt for each of the characters. And as you mentioned, the nuances and the layers. And I felt that was handled so beautifully in the performances and in the writing of the script as well. For you, Harry, this is another question. When we meet Tom in 1957, he's trying to escape the narrow world he's always known. Can you tell us about the search for his identity and the circumstances that held him back?
I'll try. Yeah, I think Tom is, I think he's very curious, which is kind of, I think he's someone who is born into a very small world, and as, you know, if you're born into that kind of environment, it's hard to, I think you feel like you know where the edge of the world is, and slowly throughout the story, I think he's realizing that it's a little further away than, you know, Brighton or kind of that coast. And I think, you know, people live entire lives in very small bubbles like that. And if that's how you've been brought up, and everyone around you and the generations before you, your parents, etc., have all lived within that kind of small bubble. It's obviously very difficult to even picture the world outside of that. So I think when he meets someone like Patrick, who is well-traveled and likes art and finds himself kind of being curious about those things, it kind of just sparks this, it's kind of like feeding his curiosity, that it's not kind of strange for him to be curious about stuff. And then I think him with Marion, he also finds ultimately a friend who is the most accepting of him. And I think that's why, kind of, regardless of whichever way you kind of think on their relationship, I think their friendship is incredibly real and loving and tender.
And that, very profound search for identity for your character brings us to the 1990s. And this is a question for you, Linus. How did Harry's performance inform how you played Tom 40 years in the future? And how did that character grow?
Well, this might not be a direct answer to the question, but Michael said a very clever thing when he could have, of course, put a lot of prosthetics on these young people and made them play the older people. But it's kind of true that we become different people later in life. And what Harry brings is this, he naturally brings this, I think, sort of innocence and a sense of wonder. It's not naive, but he's very present in that. And it's a moment in time where there's so much potential. It's colourful. There's so much of a future that's there. And then what happens, and he gets frozen in time. So I got the job of taking on the man who's lived with a heartache and a heartbreak for 40 years. And it's quite something to contemplate. I think many of us who've been on the planet a little longer might know a little bit about that. But what's it like to embody it, but at the same time you're in denial of it? It's there as a deep ache, but he's got this friendship. He loves Marion. And, he's got a life. And suddenly the catalyst is brought in and everything is turned upside down. So it's a brilliant premise. That's what I love about the film, that it deals with such a big movement of time and of a large movement of life. And the way Michael brought us into the two worlds, he included us all in the way he was going to approach it, but it was very colourful and lively and bon vivant and fantastic in the 50s, and we're in this sort of dour, slightly trapped, inhibited. Even the way it's shot, we're sort of trapped inside our lives, but we have a love there. And so, I think in a way I wasn't trying to mimic Harry, or we talked about having a limp or a wink or something that would, but we decided in the end it's two completely different worlds that are united in the same universe somehow.